Morning papers. With me today, Cindy Yu from The Times and Jamie Klingler, founder of Reclaim These Streets. So welcome back to both of you. We're looking inside the papers. We've lots of the front pages in the other hours. And Cindy, you've picked out the latest from Israel. And this was after criticism from allies of Israel, the UK, France and Canada, and how Benjamin Netanyahu has responded.
Yeah, and Netanyahu has said that these Western leaders are emboldening Hamas. He's saying that, you know, when, these are his words, when mass murderers, rapists, baby killers and kidnappers thank you, you're on the wrong side of justice, which of course is a very controversial and some might say reductive way of seeing the Canadian, British and French leaders warning earlier this week about just this war without end is how they're phrasing it. What it shows is basically that the Israeli government is not backing down at all, but actually that their Western allies are increasingly uncomfortable, especially as this aid blockade continues to go on into its second and third months, increasingly uncomfortable with what the end goal here is in Gaza. You know, I mean, they so far have not called it a genocide, but it is becoming increasingly hard to see what is the ultimate thing that Netanyahu wants from this, short of actually eradicating what is seen as Palestine at the moment.
And there has been a partial lifting of that blockade, hasn't there? There's some trucks are starting to go into Gaza now, but still a huge amount of criticism. And from people who would normally be backing Israel, these are usually Israel's allies.
And everyone roundly were very upset about the murder of the two people outside of the embassy, rightfully so. But that doesn't then mean that the treatment in Palestine is warranted or needs to keep happening. So I think the global community is really pushing back in quite a way.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how that develops. In the meantime, we're going to go to a very different story now. This is inside The Guardian. This is the announcement today of the government introducing new standards for animal welfare in zoos.
And some of that is about that you won't pet marine animals and you won't be touching them or having children get into the pools with any of the rays or anything like that, and giving elephants more room to live and to breathe. And I think that
bigger enclosures.
Bigger enclosures, yeah. And it costs more because of space, but it's about time. Like, we really need to pay attention to what those animals' needs are as sentient beings.
Yeah, I mean, what's your feeling about zoos? I mean, it's one of those subjects, isn't it, that does divide people. Some people feel uncomfortable about seeing animals out of their natural habitat and enclosed.
All
and
children
others
love zoos, right?
Yeah.
You know, as a child growing up, you love going to the zoo to be able to see these animals. But as you get a bit older, I mean, I certainly have gone through this in the last 10 years or so, where I've just you realise how bizarre and cruel and actually maybe a bit archaic this system is to have these wild animals in here. Of course, there's a real argument over conservation, whether actually the raising of awareness, the ability to host these animals in very safe environments is good for them. But I think overall we have gone beyond that in terms of, you know, raising awareness. Nature documentaries are so much better these days than they used to be. You know, if you wanted to find out about an animal, you watch it at David Attenborough.
That's very true.
Instead of going to a zoo. And conservation tours and safaris are also possible, and maybe actually for certain animals, not maybe for all animals, but certain animals that need a lot of space, it is not the right thing to do.
Well, yeah, although zoos would defend themselves and say they have these important breeding programmes and they do try to educate children and make them aware of how precious our wildlife is. And in fact, I think some of these guidelines do actually impose new duties on those kind of conservation efforts in zoos as well, don't they?
And support them. And we're in a lucky place in London. You can go almost to the zoo and see the animals without actually going inside. I was saying that I see the warthog on the canal every day.
What? Did they let it out?
No, but it's the free part. So you're along the canal, so you can see the warthog every day.
You can see the
camels,
giraffes.
yeah, and the giraffes. So, like, if you go to the cheap seats, walk around Regent's Park, you can see quite a bit of the zoo.
And I think it's important to say that some zoos are clearly better than other zoos. You know, I mean, some of the zoos that I've been to, particularly in China, had very bad animal welfare provisions, and London Zoo is clearly one of the best ones out there.
Yeah. Good stuff. Let's move on to... what are we looking at now? This is a story by Cindy, all about you as well, isn't it? And you've just joined The Times.
Yeah.
And I did notice your picture on the front page of the front saying I'm not a Chinese spy.
Yeah.
This is your article in the magazine. So tell us all about this.
So the reason I've written this is actually I was having a chat with my new editor at the Times about, the things that I've realised working in journalism for the last, less than 10 years really, but reporting on China in particular. And one of the things that I get quite a lot, not necessarily directly at me, but through colleagues who say that they have been warned, is people saying Cindy Yu is actually a spy. Did you know that? And I hear this, through the grapevine. But it's just ludicrous because really the evidence that they point to is just that my reporting on China is to say that it can't be summarised as China bad, that there's actually more to China than just the really horrible stuff, the really repressive stuff that we hear about. Those things exist and they're really important to talk about, but there's just so much more to it. And I've written a very personal story about where I come from, on this, both kind of literally where I come from, but also intellectually, to say that actually there's so much more to this country of my birth than in the English language media we often give it credit for. And it's very important for people with my background to be able to say what we know and what we're learning without being accused of ulterior motives.
And there is a lot of concern at the moment, isn't there, about Chinese influence and Chinese investment in this country and what the implications of that could be. How nuanced do you think the debate is?
Not nuanced enough. I can totally understand and increase in tensions, but that is the kind of increase in tensions that in the last century led to McCarthyism in America. We have been here before. There is a lot of throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to being worried about foreign influence, and I think we just need to be mindful of the principle of innocent before proven guilty. We can't just go around accusing people with Chinese faces of certain loyalties without any evidence of that. And obviously, as you know, this is a very personal issue to me. Yeah,
and it makes a really interesting read. And I'm glad you chose it to talk about. It would have been strange to bypass it. Let's move on to the Telegraph next, Jamie. There's an article in here about the latest message from Donald Trump, this time to Keir Starmer, and his familiar phrase, drill, baby, drill, being used there in the headline. This is all about saying, don't worry about net zero.
Drill more. Instead of using windmills and using the idea that the windmills are unsightly as a reason to not use the energy sources. It's just this idea that I strongly recommend that they take all of my advice. I strongly recommend. And it's amazing how much in the papers are just coming from Truth Social and Twitter rather than actually dealing with policies, dealing with the EPA, dealing with the reasons that we're doing renewables, the reasons that there's a net zero plan.
Yeah, and I mean, this is very much reflects what Donald Trump himself is doing in the States, and giving a kind of fillip to the oil industry and fossil fuel industry there, saying that he doesn't want to waste money on programs that Joe Biden introduced.
Yeah, and I can see Trump thinking that this is actually friendly advice for Starmer. Mr. Starmer, we've done this here in the States, and actually the US has been a net energy exporter since 2019 because of its oil and gas drilling. I can imagine him thinking this is what the UK could be doing as well, especially in the face of these sky-high energy prices, especially when we have the North Sea. One thing about this story to me is, what does this mean for the progress of net zero now? Because actually, having been introduced by the Conservative Party, it really is meeting a very turbulent time at the moment, where we're at a crossroads, where this country might not continue to go for net zero. You're seeing
it's in law, though, isn't it, to meet some
it is in law,
targets.
yes, and I think Starmer wouldn't repeal that, but you see from the right of politics, the Reform Party, but also the Conservatives these days,
They've backed away from it.
Backing away from net zero. But this comes at the same time as the EU is going more for green energy. And of course, we have the threat from China in terms of the imported renewable energy, things like solar panels and electric cars. So it puts Starmer in a really tricky position where if he wants to keep going green, he's got this president behind him criticising him.
The feeling seems to be that most people would say we want to do something to tackle climate change, but there are concerns about what it could mean cost-wise to people personally.
Absolutely, but we're also talking about a new generation coming up beneath us saying, absolutely, we need renewables. We will not tolerate the continued gas energy and global warming.
Yeah, and we come back to Chinese investment in all of that as well, don't we? Which we've kind of touched on. But finally, we have to talk about Boggle, which is a game that I spent a lot of my childhood playing. Oh, that's looking.
Did you ever play replastering?
Did I play replastering?
That's the highest scoring. So that's what this piece is about. It's the highest
away.
scoring word possible on a Boggle board. And it's taken this guy, Dan Vanderkim, years and years of a software program, and he says he was the only one trying to solve this problem. But replastering is the highest. But the normal board contains 3,625 points.
Which is incredible because it's basically letters in a 4x4 grid.
Yeah, that you're
just got
diagonals
search.
and they had, yeah.
Yeah. But Cindy, it's not a game that you've
I've
spent
not
too much
actually
time troubling yourself
yeah,
with.
I've actually not really come across this one, but my mind is boggled by this story. Sorry to say. But what I really like is that Vanderkam, he's a Google software engineer. He's a freelance software engineer. He sees it as a mathematical question, and he says that he's been searching for this answer alone since 2004. And you do wonder, does he get out much other than doing this thing?
I think he's done fine work. And, I
Front page of the
applaud it.
FT.
Exactly, and we get to talk about Boggle. Fantastic. Really lovely to have your company this morning. Thanks both very much.
Thank you.
A show of military might and menace.